It's Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT, Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial. And
Dave on the board.
And this week we'll do something on Bicycle Way Master Plan. So, but in the meantime, Dave has been to the Homer Pop Festival and
Soda Festival. We should talk about that, yes.
Oh, okay.
I grew up calling it pop. Discovered that I live far enough south now that it's around here. It's called soda.
Okay.
So, or soda pop, or some places it's simply called Coke. You can have an orange Coke, you can have a lemon Coke, you can have whatever you want.
Yes.
But
well,
yes.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, so this is a very interesting community that we live in. If you go the 10 to 20 miles east of here to Homer, there is an actual shop that specializes in soft drinks. Now, I believe they do carry the standard issue major label products. They also carry the slightly off label ones like Knee High and things like that. And then the woman, I think her name is Kim, I'm blanking on it. I think she may get these sodas from around the country. She gets some of them from the East Coast, maybe as far west as the West Coast, and she keeps them stocked. It's not inexpensive. You can drop $10 on a 6-pack if you buy this stuff, but it's very, very different. She specializes in making sure that the stuff that she carries doesn't have high fructose corn syrup. They use cane sugar or beet sugar or just plain old whatever sugar. So WEFT had a table there. There were about 20, 25 tables there, and different organizations contributed volunteers who would be there, and we poured 9 or 10 different kinds of soft drink for people. People buy tickets. It's like $0.25 a ticket, and you get an ounce of any kind of soft drink that you care to as you wander around from table to table. Last time, the day after, Bill Saylor came here, and he brought us a bottle of something called Moxie that he had discovered. Wouldn't you know it, Moxie was one of the 10 or 9 things that WEFT had to serve yesterday. So I got to encourage people to try this. If they came over and they weren't sure what they wanted to try, I would say, if you're just going to try one thing, try this stuff. This is a cola. But as I explained it to people, if you think of Pepsi as very fruity and sweet, Coke, pretty much the same category, but maybe a little bit less. Moxie is like for the grown-ups. It's got a lot of cola flavor, but without all that sugar. What sugar it has is real sugar, and it doesn't have the fruity flavor to it. And it has something else. It took me a long time. There's some kind of gum that has this kind of flavor in it. It's like clove or something like that. And it makes this particular soft drink.
It might have some ginger in it, too.
Could be. And there were, oh my gosh, if you want ginger ale, there were some really, really potent ginger ales that you could try here at this place. So that's what this was. Huge amounts of soft drinks for people to try, lots of different kinds of barbecue. There was a barbecue competition. I wasn't there long enough to find out who won, but they had these gorgeous trophies for the person who made the best barbecued chicken, pork, beef, all the way down. They didn't have tofu. That would have been an interesting trophy, but it was all meat-based. Live music, including lots of folks from Champaign here. Emily Otness is one of the new up-and-coming folks on our local music scene, and she was there playing solo and with a band. And the Prairie Dogs were there to start things off, doing their assortment of folk, country, and bluegrass. Lots of stuff for the kids. I didn't get over to that part to see what was going on. Old-time cars. Oh, my gosh, these gorgeous, gorgeous. You know, when the form of the car was more important than the function. You know, they were. I'm sure they didn't get very good gas mileage because of the shapes of these cars. But yeah, just gorgeous to look at. Just the shapes of the cars, and then the paint on these cars were really, really interesting colors. Not your typical sparkly red hot rod sort of color or whatever. So beautiful weather out there, a little on the warm side, but a good breeze too. So hopefully everyone who
one-day event.
Yes, it was just yesterday from 10 in the morning until 7:30 last night. And plenty of WEFTies came out. I'm sure that Lori Serb, I've got to say thanks to Lori Serb. She was the coordinator for the whole thing. I've got enough other things to do around here. I really didn't want to have to be responsible for getting a dozen or so volunteers ready to go and things like that. So thanks to Lori for taking on getting all of that. And Ed Hadley for redesigning our brochure. Now when we go to events, we can actually hand people things and they can see our grid and find out who WEFT is. So yeah, I think lots of fun for thousands of people, certainly. I'm bad guess at 10,000 people or whatever. I'm sure we'll find out.
Small community events at most all of the towns around. At some time, county fairs also, they draw in a lot of local people and often have guests that are from out of town. Well, I want to, in passing, I want to say that there'll be a memorial to Jim Zimmerman today at the Barnhart family farm. It'll be from 3 till 5. And the family farm is very much a prairie farm, which Jim was into and helped to gather up seed for that. They've got something like 60 acres there now. Might even be more than that. And that'll be 3 to 5 this afternoon. If you're not sure where Barnharts are, you go straight south on Vine and until you meet Church Street, Savoy. It's sort of on the Yankee Ridge Moraine. There was also a Karlstrom sale. Ron Karlstrom died, and there was a sale on Friday, and there will be a sale of his paintings on June 20th and 21st. So he was a very productive gentleman. Now, I want to say something about charrettes and master plans. What was happening this week at Monticello was not totally a charrette, but planners often use the technique of developing an idea of the resources and putting together an idea plan to which people can react. They may have a team of people, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 people, that would look at different resources, water, soils, history, things like that. They then present a case for what they found out about, but it's very much an inspiration for further interaction. They also, during the preparation time, have interviewed key people who may have some biking experience, for instance, if it's a bicycle way plan, or people who have a overall community involvement, say mayor or city manager, things like that. So they present, and then they usually have some suggested questions. It may be a team effect to bring in 30 or 40 people, encouraged sometimes by the provision of a T-shirt or something that would give the event some character. And the questions raised are back and forth with the audience, and then there's usually maps are provided, and they're enlarged maps so that you can draw them and make comments on them. And then groups get together on those maps and present a case. So that's briefly what a charrette is about, or this sort of planning for a long-term plan. A master plan is not a fait accompli. It is usually one that changes over the years. It may be 5 years that it will be changed, 10 years, but it's something that gives you a guideline onto which people can hang their interests. It also is very helpful for people who are providing funds for projects, and it helps with grantsmanship. And so this is a professional group, Farnsworth. As far as I could find on the internet, It's based in Indianapolis, but it has subunits. And this one is in Peoria. So they came with Jeff Martin was the leader, and then there was a woman named Kate who did some of the specifics, and joined with an intern from the University of Illinois, which interests us a lot because the University of Illinois owns Allerton Park, which is nearby, and we're also interested in how students get to work with this sort of situation. Okay, present in the background was the mayor, the city manager, the economic coordinator, the developmental person, the recreation people, and also people from dimensions that are important, like Allerton Park or Heartland Pathways, because we have a railroad bed in the area. And the Department of Transportation sent someone from Paris, which is a regional headquarters. So Jeff Martin gave a presentation to start with, and the first picture was, where do we fit into the region? So he had Decatur at one end and Danville at the other, and he had the Constitution Trail in Bloomington, and then Champaign-Urbana in the middle. You have to remember that Champaign-Urbana doesn't have a very, very flat landscape, and it doesn't really have the terrain that you find in Piatt County, DeWitt County, or Vermilion County. So we're somewhat dependent on those surrounding counties. The plan mainly was a Monticello plan, and it's sort of looking at small steps. So you start off with a simple plan with jurisdictional limits. But there is also that thought plan that is the first slide, is where do we relate to other places? Closer in, there are places like Lodge Park, Allerton Park, Bement, Clinton, Power Plant Lake, Weldon Springs, places that you can go to locally. So that's long shot, medium shot, and then you're into this city discussion. There were, as with most charrettes, a body politic of knowledge. The planning people have been to Monticello. They have taken bicycles around the city. They've taken cars and done windshield observations and got a feeling for the area. And that's an important part of the presentation, because many of the people attending aren't necessarily knowledgeable about their own area and its resources. So that put together a few things. And Kathy, the planner, came up with the concept of dividing the city into 4 quadrants, mainly because you need to talk about certain areas, and it makes it a little bit more simple to be able to say that's quadrant A, B, and C, D, and to refer to the resources there. And so she gave a presentation that had certain suggestions with it, but that was not in great detail and not in an unchangeable manner. So at the end of the presentation were a number of questions. I asked the audience, for instance, how far they rode, what sort of bicycles did they ride, what was the age group, where were some of the hazards, Where were some of the excitements? Where were some of the extensions? So after these questions were given forth, there were safety details and audience participation. So tables were set up, probably 5 or 6 tables, with maps, 4-foot size maps, so that you could write on them, and 2 maps, one of the city itself and one of the surroundings. I would have liked to have a 3rd map, which would have included Allerton Park and Cisco, Clinton, and even into Champaign. There was mention of the Kickapoo Trail and was some discussion as to how we get to these places. We were there as Heartland Pathways, and we have a railroad bed in the area. And so the question is there, what is our mission? And our mission is mainly conservation. So do you put in a trail that is 8 foot wide, or do you put in a trail that is 4 foot wide and is a nature trail and may not be paved but with chip limestone, and it may be only for people who are walking or people who are using an all-terrain bicycle or a hybrid bicycle, and we make it one way. So that came up for some discussion, and we were working on that. Chris Carl, who's been working with me quite a lot, had ideas about that, and he has been meeting with Allerton people, and there was people from Allerton Park there, the director, Derek Peterson, and there were people from the community, like Kitty Hudson is an architect, but he's involved in lots and lots of Monticello boards and has lots of ideas, and so to have some of those resource people there was good. The children were involved, young people. What did they think? And there was one discussion of people on street pathways, the sidewalks. It's rather dangerous to have young children on the road. It was pointed out that the roads are narrow enough that you can't really have a dedicated path for a bicycle. And if you do have a dedicated path, it takes away from the people who might have lawns and vegetation along the side. And do you always want to have bicycles oriented to a designated pathway? But then I was reminding myself that if you're in Champaign, you get fined $15 for riding on the sidewalk. It's not always got teeth in it, it's not always implemented, but it's there. But I went to the farmer's market yesterday, and Smythe was telling me that it mainly pertains to the city itself, and in Urbana it's $100 if you ride on the bikeway. He said that it's mainly for people under 12, that they let them be on the sidewalk. Sidewalks aren't always good because you have a tree that lifts up the sidewalk and all of a sudden you have a bump, which can be dangerous. But basically it keeps people, young people, off the road. So youngsters were actually contributing to the debate. So everyone is sitting down and they're for half an hour figuring out where to go. We were a little bit of a loss because we don't know all the streets of Monticello, but we do know the conservation sites. We do know what our trails are, and we've got a perpetual easement with Monticello to go west over the Sangamon River, the Sangamon Bridge Trail, and that is being extended another mile around toward Applewood Drive, and where the new library is going to be, and where there's a 30-acre a sports facility being built. So it's an area where there's activity. It's a little disappointing to know that there may not be a library downtown that you can walk to. You may have to get in a car or onto your bicycle to get there. We added the thought that there might be a nature booth, a kiosk of some description which would explain the vegetation on the railroad bed, which is adjacent to this complex at Applewood. The presentations were interesting. Katie Hudson had been really looking at this in detail, and he had all sorts of thoughts about places that needed attention. The road that comes in from Monticello is kind of dangerous. So how do you work that or avoid that? It's a fairly narrow road. It's been widened some because there's access for grain coming into the elevators nearby, and the elevator complex is being enlarged because GMO corn is yielding higher than regular corn. So there's a need for increased attention to grain storage. There are various corners that were not safe or could be improved. There was a feeling that there ought to be a place for parking your car, a place for parking bicycles, and racks. How many racks? And then there was consideration of teaching. How do you get young people together in a group? Do you have a ride of people on a Friday night or something like that? Do you have a club? Do you have certain people who are trustees of a bicycle way? How do we organize this in an era when you do not have a lot of volunteer young folk? We're having a lot of retirees, but the demographics of this is that you have a huge bulge of people that are baby boomers that came back from the war and had families, and then there was fewer children from those. There's still a lot of children, and they are beginning to retire, sometimes at an early age. So can we lock into those people? Well, yes, and maybe those people who are in that last generation are now having to look after their baby boomers, as well as do their own things and have their own families and do music or whatever you want. So we need to figure out whether there are people who might want to belong to this sort of organization. They're retirees, and maybe they're going to live 30 years more. Do they have a second career? Or do they like to help in small pieces? The small pieces don't always meld together, so you still need someone who brings together these people. I'm just looking at my notes to see what I've got here. Well, let me say that the maps came with coloured felt tip pens, and green was for a pathway that you thought should go in soon. Red was for one that might, I think the other way around. Red was be an urgent need, and green was future need, and then blue was way down the road need. And So I sat down with Floyd Oilsop, who is the city manager, and chatted with him for a while. And then I sat down with Tim Hayes, who is a city council person who was there. And we looked at some alternatives. If you don't know Monticello, you would be encouraged to go to Google Earth and follow the things that I'm going to talk about. But there currently is a rail trail that comes in on the interurban. Imagine that from Urbana and Champaign to Monticello, there used to be an interurban, and it runs parallel to the main line. It has been somewhat consumed, but it is 37 feet wide compared to 100 feet wide for the main line. Mostly what Heartland Pathways has bought has been the main line, so we have 100 feet. 37 feet is not a lot of room to put in a trail and have dignified things alongside. That trail comes into Whiteheath, goes through Whiteheath, and down to the Monticello Railway Museum. Now, when they first moved it out there, the main line was active, and they had no idea that it was going to close out. So they bought the old interurban that goes from Nelson's Crossing, which is their headquarters, about 3 miles out of town, and it goes up the hill, up a moraine, and up to Whiteheath. And they bought a Y there. A Y allows you to turn the train around and come back down, and they extend on the 3 miles to Monticello from Nelson's Crossing. Now, they were able to buy the main line. The main line closed out, and so much of their rail activity runs on the main line, not on the interurban. It may be someday they will put in an electric train on the interurban, but they're not to that stage yet. The Railroad Museum doesn't really like to see a lot of population haphazardly move through their rolling stock and their museum. So one of the things we were trying to do is look at how you would get past the Railroad Museum. There is already a trail on the interurban from Valentine Park, or almost the Railroad Museum, into Monticello. It curls around and it parallels the main line. At Monticello, instead of continuing with the railroad line to Armenia and Cisco and Argenta and Oriana to Decatur, it goes straight south to Bement. And I'll be back to that 8 miles in a moment. But let's talk to Tim and figure out, Tim Hayes, the board member, and figure out how we might get around the Railroad Museum. There's always access to the Railroad Museum, but not just through passage. Well, there's farmland there. You can come from Monticello on what some people were calling the Sunshine Trail. It's about 3 miles out to Camp Creek. The trestle for the interurban was removed some years ago because it got dangerous. So then if you're going to go across Camp Creek, you either have to go across on a high bridge, which would be costly to build, or you have to go through on a ford, so that it's only available during the dry months, and it's a ford, and you have to make the ford low enough that the water runs over it. And if you make it halfway house, it usually gets destroyed because trees and things coming down on a flood time will pull the bridge out. So to avoid that, you go east a little bit and wiggle or woggle around the Miller property and then up to White Heath in a different manner. So we outlined that. When you get halfway, you can take a turn to the left at a little cemetery that's there. Cemetery has history. It's you look at these little features as pieces of interest, and you try to have alternate traffic ways, not just one circuit. So if you take that road east, you come to the Railroad Museum's lines. There are two lines there. It's identified by a George Washington facsimile house, which is very near the highway. You can see it from the highway. But that road goes to the crest of the hill, it's a moraine, and the interurban is no longer used as they used to have a 2-mile track or a mile track up the hill and back down to Nelson's Crossing before they ever got the main line which allowed them to go into Monticello. There was a switch there so that the engine could be brought around and put onto the front of the cars, and steam engines especially like to go front ways, not back ways, but that's okay. At that site, the interurban is not used to White Heath, so you could have another alternative to, instead of going straight into White Heath, you can go to the interurban and go up the interurban tracks. The main line is in use, and it is actually used often to store ADM grain cars and cars that are not used for a time, put there on demurrage where they pay rent to the Railroad Museum, and that helps the Railroad Museum survive. But the rides on the Railroad Museum mainly go from Nelson's Crossing to Monticello. It's a 3-mile trip back and forth. For certain things like gala days when they have fireworks and things like that, they can take a train up to the top of the hill. Sometimes I've been there and they've had to take a water cart behind the train because the fireboxes let little pieces of hot coal out and they can set the tires afloat. So they don't go up there yet. This is one of those things where you do a little bit at a time. So there could be another 4 miles up the hill to White Heath. At the moment, that is used mainly for storage of cars. So now, when we go across those two railroad lines, they're on the east side of 72. 72 is a major highway. So the question is, how do you get across the highway? Well, there's a nice little bridge there over the highway. And then you can go on to old Route 47, which goes down past Lodge Park. And Lodge Park is a wonderful park to go and see natural history, and it also you can take old Route 47 into Monticello on what is known as Route 105. If you back off, you can also take that road across the Crybaby Bridge and go across to Buck's Pond, and that's on the other side of the river. You can also go right instead of left on old Route 47 and go to Shady Rest. And Tim Hayes had a story to tell about Shady Rest. There was a film that had the name of Shady Rest, I think, and it was because someone who was acting in the film knew about Shady Rest. Do you know?
Yes, it was a TV show called Petticoat Junction.
Yes, that's right. Tell us a little bit more about it.
But that's about as far as I can go. It was back in the era of the Andy Griffith Show and very gentle comedies and things like that. And yeah, it was a rural community, and Shady Rest was the name. And much of it was centered around the train station, as I recall. Like one of the main characters was probably something involved with the trains that would come through town. And there were several sisters who had love interests in the community, and there was a pig called Arnold. That's about, again, I was fairly young at the time. This would have been before 1969, I think. This would have been before we landed on the moon and such. It was maybe a black and white TV show then. So, but yes, Shady Rest was the name. That was even part of the song title of the TV show is come take a little trip, whatever, to join us in Shady Rest. So,
Well,
yeah.
somebody knew about Shady Rest in Monticello.
Well, I'll be darned.
And so that's how the movie got its name, or how the set got its name. Tim knew that. Tim has grown up in Monticello, has been on the city board for a long time. So these are little things that I was learning, which houses have been taken out, and I've been around enough to know where this route would go and where the alternatives are. And we also can go right into White Heath and then down to Shady Rest. Shady Rest was one of these places that was a picnic ground where you could take your horse and sulky about 15 miles. That was about enough for a horse in the days when we were totally dependent on horses. So that has become a natural area with trails through it, and it's run by the Piatt County Forest Preserve. So we were looking at those alternatives and the possibility of taking a trail around to the east from White Heath to Seymour. These are the sort of suggestions that go to the Farnsworth group. They pick up the things and look at your writing, and that helps. So then we turned around and went south. This interurban went south to Bement, and that's an 8-mile trail. And somebody said they had mown it last year, and that they thought that this was useful because people didn't know it was there. And I beg to disagree, because the motorcycles especially didn't know that it's a fairly straight corridor. Somebody else designated this potential trail as boring. Well, I wanted to remind them that that was, you could have prairie along there, and there was prairie, and I was kind of disappointed to see it mown. In fact, I took a photograph of this extensive 8-mile of mowing and wondering how much it cost to do that. I thought it was done by the Department of Transportation, which owns the corridor, but apparently not. It was a local feeling that it should be mown, and so I took a photograph and then I enlarged it, and we put that in through the Champaign Freedom Parade. I not knowing that somebody had, in good faith, mown it. My criticism was that if you mow this, you're going to mow out the prairie that exists there anyway, and it's on soil that's reasonably undisturbed. It's only 37 feet wide, but it need not necessarily be boring if you know something about prairie. There's a Lincoln-Douglas debate situation there. Does get to Bement, and Bement has its history too. There's a cemetery on the way. So you make these sort of annotations and say, yes, you can get used to it. And if the rail trail is boring, then the roads are boring too, because they're just straight Jeffersonian plat. So we looked at that one. Then we look at the area going west of Monticello. There's a trail been put in by the city of Monticello. It's very nice. We could never have afforded to do it, but we did have the pizzazz to buy the railroad bed, and that trail is used a lot. It accidentally had a fire on and burned part of the trestle, but it was popular enough that has been repaired, and it's a popular bicycle way between Monticello and the little suburbs that are on the other side of the river. So the question is, we have one existing trail which is very good, and we are in the process of clearing the trail to Applewood. That's another mile, and then there's 4.5 miles to Willow Branch. And it goes past Armenia. So we had some discussion of, we've had this on the air before, pertaining to Armenia and Sam Allerton and his involvement in providing Union troops with commodities, for food commodities. And is this historic enough to preserve? And so in that case, we had some debate with Derek Peterson, the manager of Allerton Park, because I would like to see the farm buildings preserved, and I don't want to see Armenia turned into a cornfield. So we had some debate about who owns it, who operates it. It's under the care of the foundation, the University of Illinois Foundation. So can we talk to the foundation? It's worked by contract farmers, and there are other sundry buildings around which make the site interesting. The elevator is there. Interestingly, the elevator is between Cisco and Monticello. Usually the elevators are about 5 miles apart, but Armenia is in the middle, which probably meant that Sam Allerton or Robert Allerton had the get up and go to put in an elevator on that railbed. So we could reconstruct that a little bit. Do we go through the university's ground, or do we go to Wildcat Creek on county roads? Do we go down to down Willow Branch and go around the back side of Allerton Park? Do you go into Allerton Park somewhere near the Centaur, not too far from the Sun Singer, and then make a circuit through Allerton Park to the house? Do you take another alternative, which would be over the bridge that goes over the Sangamon, the road bridge in Allerton Park, and brings you out onto Allerton Road? Do you get to visit the rookery there for birds that has been purchased fairly recently by the Land Trust Association? There are 2 or 3 plots have been bought there. Do you think about canoeing if you want to do that too, from coming into Allerton from Fisher, which takes you probably 6 or 7 hours to canoe, especially if there are snags in the river, trees fall and the like, where you have to portage your canoe. So we're looking at how you get to Decatur and Danville. What sort of bicycles do you ride around Allerton Park? Do you have hybrids? Do you have? It's pretty pushy to take a all-terrain vehicle around. You might have a 20-mile circuit. Who wants to ride what distance? So there were some hands up as 3 or 4 miles, and one person who is an avid bicyclist and a forester, he probably does 100 or 120 miles a day. So you probably need to do that on a high-priced bicycle, and that means that the road should be in shape. So there's a discussion about whether the money goes into the rail trail or whether the money goes into having a road. Or do you put a designated side track on, like old Route 47, which has been replaced by 72. Most of the traffic is on 72. But there are people who drive along old Route 47 at 70 and 80 miles an hour. So how do you reduce the possibility of deaths on that road if you use that all the way into Argenta and Oriana and into Green Switch in Decatur? Well, part of it is signs. So you need signs, and you need directions, and you need clubs, and you need to know where your base is. So who rides what, where in Monticello? That has to be determined. And it might be for change. So you might not be catering for mountain bicycles at the moment. You might be catering for children. So where, to what school? Can you walk to school? Who's hiking? Who's riding? And there's even some discussion of the terminology, because people who ride Harley Davidsons like to refer to themselves as bikers. So do you call them bicycles or do you call them bikes? Traditionally, they've called the push bike a bike. And so where is the base for this? And it's so important to have this document so that we can hand it to people who might want to help be involved. Can you look at the historic downtown of Monticello and alert people to the fact that it still has a courthouse, which many towns do not have. They've taken down their courthouse. And the square is reasonably intact. You might even think of restoring a building on the old Pepsin factory site, which would have some of the elements of history to it. So you'd have perhaps a condominium complex with some element in it that would say something about the economic history of a group of people discovering a pepsin enzyme that helped you digest your food, helped with diarrhea and constipation, and was popular and remains popular as pepsin that you can buy in the pharmacy right now. How could you modify and keep things historic? That's a whole other question. So how does that then allow people to get into Champaign? Well, if you come to Champaign, you can go to White Heath, but you dare not go on Route 10, because Route 10 is absolutely loaded. It's kind of narrow, and you're likely to have a transport vehicle move past you about 6 inches away from your bicycle, and that's rather scary. So the people come down Kirby Avenue and come into Champaign that way. So then Champaign-Urbana has a difficulty. How do you get from Kirby Avenue to the Kickapoo Trail? I would suggest that you keep coming on Kirby Avenue and jog across to 130 and up by Walmart and get to Danville that way. But we also have to think about how do we get to Rantoul, and these are questions that you can't ask in this sort of meeting, but it sort of concerns us if you're starting to think more broadly. You are thinking about those people who are riding from east coast to west coast and wanting to drop off on interesting places and do interesting things and perhaps stay over for a while. And then there's a question of economics. Is there a prototype for other communities that have put in bicycle shops, restaurants, interesting museums? Like if you did a Pepsin museum, it's different from a regular museum. It might be just different. It might be if you do something about a jail or something that was historic. What do you do, and how much does that return you some interesting tourism? In the long run, we have to consider tourists that are from outside, but it's also ourselves, because we've been for 6 generations getting rid of that vegetation that we mow from Monticello to Bement, and we still are getting rid of it. So how do we have a prototype? Well, yes, there are prototypes. There's a Rock Island Trail from Peoria, which has revitalized some communities by just the very presence of a bicycle trail. So I'm looking at my notes here, see if I missed anything. So awareness and education and connectiveness are all important, and you can find out some of these things by going to the farmers market in Champaign-Urbana, where the bicycle people have been producing maps, and they were giving away T-shirts this Saturday morning. So I've looked at most of the destinations, I think, close and far out. We've looked at signage. We've looked at roadsides for wildlife. When you come to a designated trail, for instance, if you're going to put a designated trail on old Route 47, then I would be very sad, because the prairie that's on our right-of-way spills over into the ditch that's alongside the road. And if you were to take that ditch and put a trail on it, we would lose a lot of vegetation. Yeah. So,
speaking of losing vegetation, as Lori Driver Dixon and I came back to town, we didn't take the interstate. We took 150 all the way. And as we got into, I guess, Urbana, we saw them widening and tearing stuff down. You've talked about this, haven't you, about how they have to take out, they're going to put more lanes on the road on 150 over there, and that means they're going to...
Sure, it's more lanes. I think it's just wider, but...
and that means taking out some of the...
At the moment, they're moving these fiber optics to the north side of the road. So there's a lot of activity out there. So some of this involves grants that these sorts of trails can't be done locally totally. So you have to have shared funding, and there's also easements on railroad beds like Amarin, where you have power lines and they have the right to do things. There are cultural things that you need to work on. We didn't discuss the trail that goes to Clinton, but there's DeLand and Weldon and Lane and Weldon Springs and Clinton, and a whole other group of things there. Do we have a prototype for communities that have benefited by having a trail? And yes, we do. Do we have volunteers that can help? Do we have professional people who can help? Can we afford to hire professional organizers? We don't know. But we also need to know, what can the university do in these sorts of things? Can this be a training situation for planners? Or even in some cases, if we re-rail any of this, could it be for railroad engineers to do some things with surveying or putting it in rail? So that's gets me there. I spent, let me change the topic a bit. I've been on South 45. We've been very pleased with the mowing of the trees on South 45. It's left things a little bit bare, but so help me, the prairie is coming back. I'm so pleased, and there are many more species there than I realized. It has been a little entangled. The mowing of it has helped you to walk through it, and you can see more. So I was very pleased this yesterday to walk that site and check out the plants that are there. We're going to be faced with 6 huge pedestals that will support huge towers to carry electricity. So they have the survey points for those have been already designated. So then we have to talk to the Amarin and to the railroad to see if we can salvage the plants that are going to be in these places. These pedestals are about 6 feet across, and in order to get into them, they put a little road across the ditch. It's a temporary road which allows cranes and the like to get in there. So it's going to be devastating in a way, but I think it will help us in many ways. But I talked to the railroad people, and they do not want us to take salvage material and take it elsewhere. The fear is that if there is something happens to that soil and it has an EPA problem, the railroad might be accused of causing a problem somewhere else. So they don't want the soil moved, but they will do their best to put the site back where the plants belong. The pedestals on the stanchions will in effect help to preserve the dignity of the site. It will not be quite so easy to look on that as an entrance corridor for business. It's not quite wide enough, and it will have some obstructions. Sometimes places that have been obstructed with dead cars and the like have also been very interesting preservation sites. Cemeteries where there are obstructions with tombstones also have a record of being interesting prairie sites in many cases. So I was pleased about that. I want to remind people that you should poke your nose into Mike and Molly's, because roster has made it to the wall in a mural, and roster has passed on, but he was very much a part of WEFT. He had a reggae program, and he was a Rastafarian, would go off to Jamaica every once in a while, and he was a cook, and and I think we're almost time. I want to remind you that Jim Zimmerman's memorial is at Barnhart's at 3 p.m. And I think that gives you an idea of what master plan is. And if you want to get it, it will be on Banner Public Television on 1 o'clock on Friday and 6 o'clock on Tuesday. And then this information will be up on YouTube.
And as always, the views and opinions expressed here are those of the speakers, do not necessarily represent those of WEFT, its board of directors, associates, station manager, or Prairie Area Incorporated. And speaking of the associates, this coming Wednesday is your quarterly chance to come and see what WEFTs look like and find out what we talk about amongst ourselves as we have various things that come up throughout the year. There are basically two great ways that you can find out what WEFT is about, besides just listening. If you come down to 113 North Market Street, you can see what 40 to 50,000 CDs look like, and these quarterly meetings, you can actually find out what concerns we have and how we try to take care of them. The next meeting then is Wednesday, June the 4th. It'll be at 7 p.m. at the Urbana Civic Center. That is at 108 East Water Street in Urbana. Everyone is welcome to attend. You can even speak up and tell us what you're thinking as our meetings go along. It is now noon, and that's it for the Prairie Monk, so it's time now for Shruti, Music of India.